a sound, a quality that made me think that my life would be better. I used to listen to KRIZ, and there was a young man on there, very studly guy, that always sounded so terrific on the radio. And I went to a theater once and I saw him and I went, wow, these people are magic. They introduced a man who came out and they said, ladies and gentlemen, Jim Titus.
Yeah.
And out walked the blackest guy I'd ever seen. And I went, oh my gosh, I could do this. This could work. But there was a guy that really brought home the sound of he loved his job. He loved our community. And tonight we would like to give the Founders Award to one of the original KRIZ kids. A guy who paid his dues, and he's going to tell you a little bit about his story, but he is our original KRIZ kid. Please welcome Mr. Bob Pond. You were a little younger in this, Bob. This is for you, bud, and you can lay it right up here, but welcome back. He drove in from somewhere.
Yeah. Actually, when I started, the main reason I got in was because I was interested in electronics. My dad was an engineer at WBBM in Chicago, and so he encouraged me to get a first-class license, and that opened a lot of doors for me. Any radio station that had more than one tower, if you have one tower, you go in all directions equally. If you have more than one tower, the signal goes various ways to protect other stations who are on that same spot on the dial. So anyway, the law was that every station had to have a chief engineer, one guy with a first-class license. But the directional stations, more than one tower, had to have a guy sitting there with a license at all times in case anything went wrong with the equipment. And anyway, so I got in that way. I was 18, and I got in KYOR in Blythe. They had an opening for a chief engineer. And as soon as I was going to ASU, came back to KPHO, came back to go to ASU, and KPHO was just going top 40. So I got in there at night while going to ASU in the daytime. And then KRIZ had the program director from KRIZ come over and change KRIZ to top 40 to try to compete with KRIZ. And they brought me, I was able to get into KRIZ. That's the way I worked my way in there. But at the time, the stations were, well, KOY, KTAR, Cool, and they were like a big broadcast facility in Los Angeles, like KFI or KNX. Everyone wore corporate attire. Everything was straight, like it is now, I guess. But anyway, so we've gone full circle. I went full circle from being the youngest disc jockey in the state to now being the oldest one here, I guess. Anyway, so they wanted younger guys because most of the guys on the radio were about 30, 35, and they're trying to play rock and roll. And Bartell was a big chain. They owned San Francisco and a few other stations. And they bought KRIZ, and they brought that sound to Phoenix. And so anyway, the PD from there came over to KRIZ and wanted to change it. Oh, at the time, it was called KRIZ and ARIZ. And we always just said KRIZ time, KRIZ top 10, KRIZ whatever. And I got tired of that, and I called it KRIZ, and the manager says, what is this KRIZ? And I said, it's just, I don't know, it's easier than saying KRIZ. And then he said, hey, you know what? Actually, we can sell this better because it's like a noun, it's like a thing instead of just a bunch of letters like KTYL and Mesa, you can't remember that. But KRIZ, and then I started saying KRIZ where the music is, and then they kind of caught on. But we didn't have any jingles. Actually, we had 3 turntables and 2, I don't know, little Ampex tape players. They're an Ampex 600. They look like a suitcase. And our commercials were on little reels and of tape. So during the 2-minute record, you'd have to cue up 2 Ampex 600s, and they were behind us. And we have a remote switch to start them. You hope you remembered which one you wanted, but we didn't have any provision for playing jingles. And we had transcriptions, electronic transcriptions called ETs. But we couldn't afford a transcription cutter. KRIZ had one, KOI had one, but we didn't have one. And so we had to use reel-to-reel tapes. And let's see, finally, we got these McKenzie tape players. They were little iron cartridges with a loop of tape hanging out of them. And you had to drop them over a roller and shut a door on them. And so it was a big hassle. So we only put jingles in there. And so that's when we finally got our jingle package. And our program director at that time was Mike Darcy. And he would stay up all night listening to KFWB. So we got the Kroll Collier jingle package, KFWB, channel 98, so this is K11, KRIZ, channel 123. But anyway, he got that package because he thought if you sounded like KFWB, you would be #1. And anyway, we had that. And so we finally had jingles. And let me see. Oh, when I started there, KRIZ had quite a variety of things. They played music in the daytime. And they had one guy in the midday that had this piano playing in the background all the time on one of the turntables. He wanted to sound like he was in a ballroom, I don't know what, with a piano player clicking away. And sometimes the two would run out in the middle of us talking and reach over, start it again. But anyway, at night, I don't know if you guys, I don't know whatever happened to it, if it was still there, but between the production room, which kind of stayed always on the right, on the left, when I was there at first, the control room was the first thing you walked to, the console, and then behind that was the transmitter. I think later they moved the transmitter or something. But anyway, and then to the left was a record library. But then later they moved the control room into the record library. So I don't know how it ended up, but anyway, that big room in between is a big studio. And is that still a studio? Did they change it to an office or something? But anyway, I just didn't use it for anything.
Conference room.
Oh, that was the conference room? Okay, well anyway, there was a guy, a country band, Sheldon Gibbs and the Arizona Hayride was on every night at 8 o'clock. Live cowboys with the big bass fiddle and everything. They were on, actually I took their place. When they wanted to get rid of those guys, and they brought me over from KPHO, and I had the night shift. And but still, they couldn't. They bought the station from a guy named Howard Loeb, and he was a concert music fan. And so one of the clauses was that we had to leave the Sunday night concert on from 6 to midnight, Beethoven and all that stuff. And so at that time we had 6 stage shifts. So I was on Monday through Friday from 6 till 8 for a while, and then on Sunday night from 6 to midnight I played Beethoven and all that stuff. And I didn't know anything about it. And Howard would come in, the ex-owner, but he would come in and with these cue cards for me to read, and I'd say, yeah, here's Rachmaninoff's fifth movement in chord 23 or something, and you know, and all week long I'm playing Jerry Lee Lewis and all that. And so that was kind of weird. But finally, the owner was, at that time, was a senator's son from Colorado. Dick, I can't think of his last name. Somehow I remember Dick. Anyway, he was pretty much of one too. Anyway, they finally got around that clause. I don't know if it had a time limit on it or something. So finally we got to play top 40 every day. And then, let's see, what's that else? Oh, they didn't have oldies then. What we had was a top 40, and then they would leave, when it dropped off the chart, it was still in the rack. And then new records would be put in there, hit picks or whatever they call them. And you could play them. Oh, we didn't have a format either. Yeah, and you know, so you would just come on and basically play the top 40 because that's what people wanted to hear. But then if there was some song that you kind of liked that had dropped off the chart, you could work that in. And then I was a big Frank Sinatra fan, so that big library next to there, I used to pull Sinatra stuff out from in the old days. They had a great library going back to Benny Goodman and all that sort of thing from, you know, the old music. And so they didn't care if I wouldn't play Benny Sinatra and then Peggy Lee, but I would play unless she had Fever out, because that was another thing. We had weird, if you look at those old top 40 sheets, you've got Peggy Lee and then you've got maybe some Theme from the Apartment and just all kinds of mixture of music at that time. But they made the top 40, and that's all that mattered. They made the top 40. And let me see. So we played those records however we thought, and that's why people would say, well, you know, I like Jack Frost, he plays good music, you know, and at that time he did play different music than I played. And so I went over to KRIZ. There was a big shakeup. They brought in a bunch of guys, Gary Seeger and those people from Denver, from the other station that the senator's son owned was up in Denver. And they brought those guys in, and so I went over to KRIZ, and the Bartels had sold it then. Yeah, I didn't work for Bartell, but it was very professionally run. They carried in the tradition of the Bartell, and they had several of the original guys were there, but most of them had left for bigger markets by then. And then I went back to KRIZ when Frank Flynn bought it in '62. Oh, in between, Shell Ingle, the manager and owner of KRIZ, the manager of KRIZ, became the manager of KXIV, and he called, and I was still finishing up at ASU, and that was much more convenient. It was over at the Caravan Inn on East Van Buren. It's much closer to Tempe than